you. Certainly none of us can approximate to the life of Joseph. I don't care how dramatic your life has been. I don't care if you fell out of airplanes. You can come close to what Joseph was dealing with in these first 50 or 60 years. Unbelievable drama. And for most of us, we get up and we do the same things over and over again. And it's all a long slide into the retirement years. And just when you're happily watching a golf tournament on television, you have to be subjected to Smith Barney and their friends and all these guys scaring you when you're just trying to have a nice quiet afternoon, scaring you about your retirement and telling you, you haven't compounded the interest enough, you're in deep trouble. If you're 45 and you've missed a window, do you realize this? Do you realize that the sweat is breaking out on your forehead and all you're trying to do is editor for years and watch golf? I'm not talking about being unprepared and foolish. Let me just stop for a moment on these retirement years, because they're getting a little close for some of us. Some of us are in them. Are we going to buy this mythology that what you do in your life is kill yourself for as long as you can to line the nest in which you plan to hibernate? So that the whole of life is just a preparation for hibernation. And you begin early on to think about what the nest will be like, where the nest will be, who will be in the nest with me. But it is all focused towards finally having made it to the point where we will be able to take the benefits of all this hard work and these resources, and we'll be able essentially to chill out. Or burn out, in terms of depending on which part of the country we're planning on doing it in. And people who have done that, are doing that, and are planning to do that, run the risk, and mark my words carefully, run the risk of living with totally earthbound horizons. Run the risk of expressing only earthly preoccupations. Run the risk of ending the life of faith in the routine, humdrum retirement years with a sorry loss of the vibrancy which may well have marked the early part of the 10,000 meters. And I want just to pause for a moment and say to myself and to you, what are you planning to do between the years of 60 and 110? I mean, are we simply going to hibernate? Or are we going to stay the test of time? Peter Cottrell, who was director of missions at LBC, came to that task having spent about a quarter of a century as a missionary in Ethiopia. He then went on to serve as the principal of the institution. He was a man of academic standing in the secular world, not simply in the world of Christendom, a highly intelligent man. In concluding his responsibilities as the principal of the theological institution and in receiving the honorary doctorates which were conferred upon him to mark the occasion, he took the opportunity to let the people know what he was planning on doing next. And he and his wife were heading back to Ethiopia to spend the remainder of their days working with the African church to ground them in the truth of the gospel, to enable them in the challenge of evangelism. But he certainly wasn't going to hibernate. People often speak about the church as if the great resource of the church is in its youth. The future of the church is admittedly in its youth, but its resource is not in its youth. Youth are untried. Youth of no experience, youth of no resources, bar the resource of their exuberance. The real resource of this church, as in any church, begins around the age of 50, 55. And just to the point where people have put themselves in a position, financially, emotionally, familially, to become an incredible amount of use, they start to talk hibernation. You can't find them. You can't count on them. And so I want to just give a word of warning and encouragement to all who are beginning to think in that way. I want to ask you, what are you planning to do between the age of 60 and 110? Are you just going to sit on the resource? Or are you going to use it? The gifts of administration that have made you strategic in your sphere of influence, are you planning simply to wait on the clock, the Rolex watch, and then chill out in Florida? Or how about bailing out now and utilizing your resource with some of the great Christian organizations that are represented both in the Eastern Bloc and in the Western Bloc, and give the last 50 years of your life to service for Jesus Christ? Doctors, nurses, school teachers, biologists, carpenters, engineers, investing yourselves for the kingdom. I don't want to set for you a standard higher than that which I live by or want to live by, because I only speak to you in recognizing that the scriptures speak to me. And I've been asking myself this question: what do I really want to do? And what would I do if I had the opportunity to do it? And if I was completely free? How many games of golf would I want to play? The answer is a lot. As many as possible. In as nice a climate as possible. Now that's the want question. Then there is the ought question. What ought I to do? It's the same question that confronts us in every consideration along the journey of life, but peculiarly so when we think in terms of the opportunity that resource and a life well spent brings to us. And here we see in this little phrase, Joseph stays the test of time. His horizons are way beyond Egypt. His horizons are not focused in himself. They don't begin and end with him. His little world isn't bordered on the north and the south and the east and the west by Joseph. He's looking way ahead. His responsibility, as he sees it, is to ensure that those who are his children and his children's children's children do not settle down in Egypt, that they don't become comfortable in Egypt, but instead that they remain unsettled enough so that one day they might be truly settled in the land of promise. You see, if you try and think in contemporary terms of what had happened here, you've got a refugee people who have been migrating across vast tracts of the country. They didn't sort of relocate in Egypt. They went to Egypt because they knew if they didn't go to Egypt, they were dead. And they went there for food. And having taken themselves into Egypt and the experience of famine, they have worked through these days. But now the famine is history. Now the famine is past. The famine is forgotten. And the refugees have grown accustomed to life in Egypt. They've grown accustomed to living in this nice section of Goshen. They have begun to multiply. They have begun to enjoy the benefits of this refugee existence. And in contemporary terms, it's often like people, for example, from Vietnam. I remember meeting somebody in Toronto when I was waiting in line to go up the CN Tower, is it? And in the course of conversation, when you wind your way through those roped-off sections, I engaged this family in conversation, and the gentleman, he turned out, was from Vietnam. And I said, are you enjoying your visit here? And he said, oh, no, I'm not visiting here. I live here. I said, well, how long have you lived here? Well, he said, I lived here since I was 4. And what do you do? Well, he said, I came with nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. And what do you do now? Well, and he'd done very well, and I asked him, do you miss Vietnam? So, oh no, America, very nice. America, so kind to me. America, very nice. How about your kids?